Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, another Nebraska commitment. And many of the Nebraska fans who've been rocking with the boys the last couple of weeks and months, you guys know what I'm going to say. Like, it's another Matt Rhule kind of guy. And three-star offensive tackle Shawn Hammerbeck from the state of South Dakota won. Nebraska's had some success going up to the state of South Dakota, obviously, with a guy like Nash. But I think more importantly, this is another fascinating athlete that you're bringing into this Nebraska program, a guy that plays tight end and defensive line at the high school ranks. Sounds like he's going to come and play offensive tackle for this Nebraska program. This is a really, really functional athlete, right? At 6'6", 260 pounds, he can dunk on the basketball court. He throws 163 feet with the discus. There is a lot to like about the athlete and Shawn Hammerbeck. And I think at the end of the day, Matt Rhule looks at this kind of guy and says, hey, we can put the weight on you. We can teach you how to play offensive line. But once again, give me the premier athletes that have this kind of frame, that have this kind of athleticism. There's some serious upside with a guy in Shawn Hammerbeck, given that he gets on some weight and kind of learns how to play the offensive line position. And there's a really strong track record for former tight ends making that transition to the offensive line. They possess kind of unique athleticism. And if you can just put the weight on the right way, kind of maintain that athleticism, there's some serious upside, right? A couple of guys that kind of came to mind. One, Lane Johnson. And this is an all-pro offensive tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles. You take a look at what he was coming out of high school, was a 6'6", 260-pound tight end that was playing JUCO ball. You take a look at another guy in Joe Staley, who's a little bit older, but very similar storyline, 6'5", 225-pound tight end that commits to Central Michigan, ends up being an all-pro offensive lineman as well. There is a track record for these kind of athletes to make it happen on the offensive line. I think if you're a Nebraska fan, it's not going to be immediate. He's not going to be a day one starter, but you go 2 to 3 years down the road, you have a really high upside offensive tackle in Shawn Hammerbeck. Going to get into a little bit of the film, talk about some of the things that make you feel good about the transition to the offensive line spot for Shawn Hammerbeck. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Nebraska fans. It's been a busy last couple of days. You guys always show a ton of support. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into Shawn Hammerbeck, and let's start with the athletic profile that you're working with. At 6'6", 260, he carries that weight exceptionally well. There's not a lot of bad weight on his frame, which makes you feel pretty good that you get him into this Nebraska program. You give him a year of good nutrition, good work in the weight room. He could easily get up to around 300 pounds during that redshirt year in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I think the second thing you're looking at is what makes you feel good about him making the transition to the offensive tackle spot. I think, one, the basketball background. This is a guy that not only can dunk a basketball, which makes you feel pretty good about the athleticism, but has really clean feet. And again, that's one of the bigger prohibitors for a lot of offensive linemen that you bring in is, do they have the elite footwork to play that offensive tackle spot? I think some Nebraska offensive tackles in the past have, certainly had that size, probably not the athleticism in the feet. You look at Shawn Hammerbeck, basketball background, a really good athlete. You probably feel good about the footwork that he's bringing to Nebraska on the offensive line. I think this is fascinating, and this is kind of goes into what we've talked about for the last couple of weeks about how Nebraska is going to build this program under Matt Rhule. One, we're going to trust our evaluations. And we don't really care what they're listed at 24/7 Sports. We don't really care what other programs are offering them. If we see this guy, we get him on campus, we see them in person, and we trust our evaluations, we're going to go and make it happen. I think that's one of the things that you're seeing Nebraska do. I think number two, it goes along with just stockpiling talent, especially on the offensive line. Give me the big functional bodies that might not be the best offensive tackles yet, or at least in this case, not even an offensive tackle yet. We'll coach them up and create good football players, but give us the good athletes. I think that's another example with Shawn Hammerbeck. And you dive into the film, and there are a few things that you really like in his film. I think one is you see the power at the point of attack, right? You talk about making that transition from the tight end position to the offensive line. You got to have some heavy hands. You got to be able to play with some physicality. You see right here, firing off the ball, low pad levels, good hand placement. That's what you want to see from an inline tight end getting it done in the blocking game. And you kind of look at throughout the film, and we won't watch too much because, again, isn't playing the offensive line at the high school level. Good athleticism, getting down the field. I think the reps on the defensive side of the football are the most encouraging because you do see, some good leverage, good pad level, but you see how he uses his hands, how he can be an athlete in space. And again, although it's not reps at the offensive tackle, you start feeling pretty good about what the caliber of athlete Shawn Hammerbeck is for Nebraska. Again, good pad level, good hand usage. We're going to get hands on this offensive tackle, a little bit of forklift action, and going to make the play. Again, we're not going to watch too much of the film because you don't see him play the offensive tackle spot. But if you're Nebraska and you see this 2025 class and what you're building, we've kind of talked about it before. Malcolm Simpson, big time upside on the defensive line from the state of Texas. Jeremiah Jones, a guy that could legitimately play multiple different positions for Nebraska on the defensive side of the football, but at the very least fits the versatility that Tony White wants. Phenomenal athlete. You look at Tyson Terry, dog on the wrestling mat. You continue to scroll down, a guy like Shawn Hammerbeck as well, just like premier athletes that are not necessarily the best football players yet, but we're going to coach them to be good football players. That is the pretty clear strategy that Matt Rhule's taking in terms of building this Nebraska 2025 class. And I think for Nebraska fans, that we just kind of trust the process for Matt Rhule. What he's done at Baylor and Temple, he did it the same way there, and it worked. And so now he's coming to Nebraska, implementing exactly what he implemented the last two stops. And I think you have a lot of confidence that they're going to get it done. We'll cut it there. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later.